Hello everyone, Ben DeBono here. Let's talk about question 17 in the Summa. Just two more counting today on this whole subtopic of the knowledge of God. So we've done ideas, truth, falsity, and then the life of God will be next time. But we got four articles today. Whether falsity exists in things, whether there is falsity in the senses, whether falsity is in the intellect, whether true and false are contraries. Which would seem to be blindingly obvious, but as we've seen, sometimes there are interesting objections, even in the cases where maybe the answer to the article is fairly straightforward. All right, let's not waste any time. Okay, does falsity exist in things? Let's find out. Augustine says that if the true is that which is, then the false, being its opposite, would exist nowhere. All right, remember how we talked about, going back up to here, are truth and being convertible terms? And so based on that, it would seem to be that if they're convertible terms, then the false being the opposite must be that which does not exist. All right, the word false is derived from the word philere. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. To deceive. Things do not deceive, according to Augustine. What he means by that, it's like, um, you know, you see a rock out there, and you think it's a squirrel. Well, you have a false opinion on that rock, but the rock, isn't what deceived you. It was your senses or some faulty reasoning on your own end or whatever. All right, everything exists so far as it imitates God. Therefore, nothing, literally nothing, is false. Nothingness is false. Okay, but argument from authority. Well, Augustine also says that while everything imitates God, everything falls short of him, and therefore there is falsity in all things to one degree or another. Since true and false are opposites, and I should mention in this question, I don't know, the arrangement of some of these articles is a little strange because, like, that's already being assumed, as is three, articles 3 and 4 are kind of going to be assumed throughout this argument. So I'm not quite sure what the logic it was on putting those later, but Aquinas was smarter than me, so I assume there was a good reason. Okay? True and false are opposites. Falsity exists where truth does, in the intellect. Things are called false when they fall short of the intellect on which they depend. In the case of artifices, they are false when they fall short of what the artist intends. So basically, for like if I sit down to make a chair, because I don't really have any skill in that area, I'm going to have in my mind what a chair should be, and then, I finish, I sit on it, it collapses because I did a crappy job. That's a false chair. There's falsity in that thing. But in the case of natural things, things that would compare not to my intellect, but to the divine intellect, they are false through evil and sin. That's a very interesting way of looking at it, then, right? So human beings have falsity in them to the extent to which they fall short of God. That's a very fascinating way of looking at evil and falseness, right? Natural things can also be false according to our intellect in two ways. Either from lacking some quality, the example that he gives is that somebody is a good actor, probably makes a bad hero. There's something lacking in him. The quality of heroism is false in that person. And then through deception or misunderstanding on our part. What about those objections? Well, to the extent to which there is non-being in things, they are false. I'm not. Yeah, so he's saying that, to the extent to which evil corrupts something, that thing becomes false because it falls short of the mind of God. So on the one hand, yes, because evil is literally nothing. But on the other hand, it affects things. And so they are false as a result of that non-being. Things deceive accidentally through misunderstanding. So I see the rock in the field. I think it's a squirrel. Maybe it really does look like a squirrel. So it hasn't deceived me through, like, the rock didn't tell me a lie, but because of the way its accidents caused it to appear in such a way where it looked like it was not, right? Looked like something it was not. And then things are false simply when they fall short of the divine intellect, and false relatively when they fall short of our intellect. That would be an important distinction there. Okay, so falsity in the senses. Well, Augustine says we are not deceived by our senses. Aristotle says falsity does not belong to the senses, but to the imagination. Affirmation and negation do not belong to the senses, thus there is no falsity in them. I see this screwdriver here, right? I'll get that up in front of the camera so you can see it too. And if, what they're basically saying is that my senses are just relaying what they see into my brain, right? Obviously, I don't understand all the science behind that. I don't understand all the science behind that and how that works. But, and if my brain looks at this and says, no, that's a rock, not a screwdriver, it has, what these objections are saying is that fault doesn't lie in the senses. But we'll see if that's the case. Well, Augustine says the senses can entrap us. Maybe there's a fault in my senses that causes me to see or miss see, something like this, and think it's actually a rock. So the fault could be in my senses, right? All right, truth is in the senses insofar as they apprehend things. Truly. So far as I can look at that screwdriver and say, that is a screwdriver, there's truth in my senses. But if I look at it and my senses tell me it's a rock, there's falsity in my senses. However, that falsity is only accidental since it is due to some defect in them. So again, kind of going back up to this objection here, that affirmation or negation don't exist in the senses. Well, that's kind of true. It's like, your senses, they're not like making judgments. The senses just say, that's what we see, and then they tell it to you, and then your mind, your intellect decides what to do about it. So any falsity on their part is an accidental falsity, right? Our senses can report sensation erroneously even though they function correctly in communicating sensation. Falsity is primarily in the imagination, but senses do play a role when they transmit false data, right? This argument means the senses don't determine what is true and false, yet they can communicate falsely. That's kind of what I was trying to say a minute ago. All right. So is there falsity in the intellect? Well, I think the answer is going to be yes, since Aquinas has kind of been assuming that so far in his argument. Well, let's see. Well, Augustine seems to say falsity exists in the false knowledge, not in the intellect itself. And Aristotle says the intellect is always right. But Aristotle also says in De Anima that there, where a composition of objects is understood, there is truth and falsity, and this composition is in the intellect. Falsity can occur in the intellect through the intellect's, should have had a apostrophe there, composition becoming mixed up. So your intellect gets all this sensory data, it's composing it with your previous knowledge, your experiences. It goes without saying our brains are tremendously complex things. And so as your mind thinks about anything and receives any piece of knowledge or data, it's all sorts of composing and dividing taking place in there to arrive at whatever thought rolls through your mind. This can occur in two ways. The intellect can misapply definitions or by composing definitions of mutually exclusive parts. In the first one, if I look at this, my intellect, my senses are functioning properly. I see it, they relay the image correctly and everything, but I still say, my brain says that's a rock. Then we're in this case. If I see a rock out in the field and I say, that rock sure looks soft, there's falsity there because my brain has taken two definitions, softness and rockness, and put them together, and you can't have a soft rock. There is no such thing, right? So there you go. Now, so probably, oops, what did I do there? All right, I think we're back on track. And if there are really soft rocks out there, I'm not making a geological argument, so please don't tell me about it. Because for purposes of our illustration, we're just going to say there's no soft rocks. All right. Augustine means that when the intellect is deceived, it does not understand that this is the case, and the intellect is always right regarding first principles. I don't know what that means, but okay. Oh, I missed this last point here. Thus, the intellect cannot have falsity regarding simple essence, but only composition. So if our intellect was to fully grasp something that was wholly simple, there could be no falsity there because there's no composition in dividing, but, you know, we really can't. You know, like if, like even a completely simple thing like God, we can't comprehend. I mean, I guess you could say we could comprehend like the essence of whiteness. So to the extent that I'm looking at the screen right here, and I see whiteness on there, assuming my senses are accurately relaying that to me, and it really is white, like there can't be any falsity about that. It's just white, and that's all there is to it. So a wholly simple thing can be comprehended, but once we start adding things on top of it, the white dog, and there's composition involved. Now we have the potential for falsity, okay? Because I can, my brain can call it the white cat, and it's really a white dog. You get the idea. Okay, are truth and false contraries? Well, the truth is that which is, and the false that which is not, but that which is and that which is not are not contrary things. One part of a contrary thing is not in the other. Falsity is in truth, therefore they are not contraries. And Augustine says nothing is contrary to the divine substance, but falsity is contrary to God. Aristotle says the blindingly obvious statement that a false opinion is contrary to a true one. Falsity is not merely negation, but it actually asserts something. This is the really important point here, okay? So Aristotle explains that falsity asserts that something is what it is not. So when I say this is a rock, I'm not merely denying, I'm not negating that it is a screwdriver. I'm doing that, but I'm also asserting what it is not. So a false opinion doesn't just negate, it asserts something else instead. Therefore, truth asserts correct apprehension of a thing, while falsity implies or asserts the contrary. It asserts a false apprehension of something. Falsity is not non-being, but a non-apprehension of being. Kind of a one you might have to puzzle through a little bit, but it does make sense. It's not non-being itself. It's a non-apprehension of being. It's a failure to correctly apprehend something. Well, truth is a correct apprehension of being. Number two, falsity of a thing is founded in the same subject as the truth of a thing. Yeah, I think it means that they're not really, it's not that the false is so much in the true, but that they're both related to the same subject. And then there is nothing contrary to God considered in himself, but in our apprehension to him, there is contrariness that it's false because we ultimately have false opinions of God. All right, that wraps up question 17. Good stuff. I'll be back in a couple days with question 18, which I think is another 4-article one. So we will just keep moving right along. Until then, I'm Ben DeBono. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.